Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Tarsha Stanley, and I am the Dean of Humanities, Arts, and Sciences here at St. Catherine University. You're joining us for our Summer Integrated Learning Series. We began last week with our first lecturer, and I'm just so grateful that Dr. Dawn Quigley is joining us tonight. The Summer Integrated Learning Series at St. Catherine University is our attempt to link all of the things that we do into a story that we tell about our mission, about our purpose, about who we are and how we serve our students and our community. So I'm so grateful tonight to have from the Department of Education, Dr. Dawn Quigley, who is going to talk to us about her topic tonight. And I'm going to just step out of the way and let Dawn get started. Let me tell you about the question session though. Dawn is going to speak for 20 to maybe 30 minutes. Then after that, she's going to take questions. I'm going to field the questions in the chat. And so just type your questions in, recognize that we can't get to all of them, and I'll try to keep the questions directly to the topic and give Dawn as much time as possible to do a Q&A. So again, thank you everybody, welcome, and thank you so much, Dr. Quigley.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Dean Stanley. Bonjour, Anin, everybody. My name is Dawn Quigley, and I'm just gonna try to share my screen. I apologize if it's not as fast. Let's see. And I just want to say thank you so much to Dean Stanley for allowing me to do this. And then also Jeff Johnson is going to help me with the technology. And for some reason, Jeff, I can't share my screen.
Okay. I can, Dawn, I can share mine. And you can just let me know when you'd like me to turn the slide. Does that work?
Okay. Yeah.
Or are you able to get yours?
That's. All right. I apologize, everybody. I knew this was going to happen. We just practiced. We just practiced.
It's okay.
Let's see. Yeah. It's not allowing me to share at all.
Okay. Well, we can just, if you just let me know when you'd like me to change the slide. Can you see this okay, Dawn?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you just let me know when you'd like me to change the slide, I can just hit the next button. Okay.
And actually, I might be able to if we're on at the same time. Okay. Did that just switch, Jeff?
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, okay. All right, well, we're just gonna, this is what educators do. We just wing it. Oh, yeah. Okay. Was that me, Jeff, or was that you?
That was me.
Okay. All right, well, again, everybody, I apologize. Okay, Jeff, I think I might be able to.
You're getting yours?
I may be able to do this. Okay. I think I might be able to do this, everybody.
Yay.
All right, Jeff, can you see it?
Not yet.
Now?
Not yet, no.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, well, we're just gonna get started. Jeff, do you want to pull out again?
Sure.
Okay, and then maybe put in present mode. Okay, all right, thank you so much, everybody. Now you can see my lovely screen. I feel like in the 1970s, you know, I'll just go beep when I want Jeff to move it forward. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. And I think I'll just say, all right, Jeff, when I want you to switch it. So, all right. So I'm just going to do a really boring about 30-second introduction of who I am. But because I am an educator at heart, I need everybody, if you do not have a piece of paper and something to write with, I need you to run for 30, 40 seconds. And I promise you will not miss anything. It's just me doing a boring introduction. Okay, all right. So just a little bit about me for those who are going to, all right, Jeff.
There you go.
This is me a little bit. I taught for 18 years in K-12. I taught everything from kindergarten up to 9th grade, and I loved middle school, junior high. Either you love that age group or you run screaming from it, and I loved it. I got my PhD a few years ago from the University of Minnesota, and my research really centers on representation of Native Americans in children's literature, and children's literature goes all the way up through seniors in high school. And then I also study about how to support non-Native teachers in how to allow them to respectfully implement Native American curriculum into their classroom. I have a daughter who is at UW-Madison second year, and then we've got a sophomore. So I always like to say that because I appreciate that you're here tonight. I know that you have families and you have pets and you have other things that you'd rather be doing. So thank you for being here. I'm also a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe, and that is in North Dakota. It's about 12 miles from the Canadian border. And my passion really is Native literature. All right. So just waiting for everybody to get their writing utensils. I also am an author, and I really see this as a continuation of my teaching about contemporary Native Americans, especially to children, to Native children, so they can see themselves, like we know Dr. Bishop speaks about windows and mirrors, but then also for non-Native students, so they can actually see that we exist, we are here today. And so my various books that have been published, Apple in the Middle, Native American Heroes from Scholastic. In 2021, I've got Ancestor Approved. That's that beautiful shawl dancer up there. And then I also have a chapter book series coming out with HarperCollins about a quirky little girl named JoJo McCoons. I describe it as, if those of you know who Junie B. Jones is, I describe it as Junie B. Jones on the res. So wait for that. Okay, right there. All right, so I have a very complicated relationship with land acknowledgements, and we don't have enough time to go into that. But one of the things that's really important is that we don't just say something, that we actually do something. We know as CSJs that we don't just say words, we do actions. And so one of the things that's really important for the land acknowledgements, we know that St. Gates is on Dakota land, and I like to promote wherever I am a scholar and author from that tribe, that tribal nation. And so I really encourage you to read Dr. Gwen Westerman, her Minnesota Mankato, the land of the Dakota. She's a scholar, and she is down in Mankato State, right? Okay, I'm just going to go briefly over a little bit. I always like to, like I said, I'm a teacher at heart, and so I just like to be really transparent about my pedagogy. And so the way that I set this up, and those of you who have done sessions with me before, this is similar to that, but we really work together, and I'm specifically going to speak about the intentionality of the learning process and how I'm setting this up. So we'll talk more about that later, right? Okay, and then these are some things just from the University of Minnesota. Most educational programs have some type of dispositions of an educator, and you can just see that these are some of the things that I'm considering you a student right now, and just to think about really being critical aware of oneself, being present in the classroom like you are right now, collaboration. This is what we're learning together in the summer series. All right. And then navigation, thinking about creative imagination and navigating into new understandings, and then really thinking about advocacy. And for me, I'm always going to ask when people do sessions with me that they really go out and turn around and be advocates for sharing the word, how important it is to understand Minnesota Native history, language, and culture. All right. All right, so we won't do this too long, but if you feel so moved in the chat, why don't you go ahead and say one word or phrase describing your current understanding of Minnesota Native American history, language, and culture. It can be, I'm excited to learn, or I'm really studying, or I don't know anything. And like I said, I'm an educator at heart. And so I think everybody, it's a really vulnerable place, especially as those of us who work in higher ed, to really say that we don't know what we don't know. And so I think this is a great learning part. Okay, so feel free to keep adding those chat messages. All right, Jeff? All right, and then we know courageous conversations, we're going to stay engaged, not just tonight. And then also expect to experience discomfort. I know a lot of times as adults in higher ed, we think that we are supposed to know everything, but it really isn't. And so we need to be vulnerable, not just today, but just with things, especially now after the murder of George Floyd. This is the time, like Dean Stanley says, this is the time to start speaking up, and we can make change at St. Kate's, great change. And then, of course, expect and accept a lack of closure. All right? All right, so I need everybody, like I said, I'm a teacher. I need everybody to get their paper, their writing utensil. If you're really tech savvy, you can use your phone to take notes. But we are going to play Wasagon Jeopardy. So that means the lightning round Jeopardy. So there's going to be 10 questions, and it's going to be fast. And there's a reason for this, right? It's part of my pedagogy. And so there's going to be 10 questions. So good luck. And the best thing about this quiz is I will never know your answers. No one will ever know your answers. This is just really for you to start thinking about Minnesota history, language, and culture. All right. Number one, how many native tribal nations or reservations are in Minnesota? Question number two, how many native tribal nations in the United States? I told you it's going to go fast. All right, number three. What is a type of a Native American dwelling? Number four. What is the significance of this figure, or this percentage, 1 to 2%? 1 to 2%. All right, number five. What is the significance of the year 1924? All right, we're halfway done. How you doing? Number six. What is BQ? What does the acronym BQ mean? And it's not barbecue. What does BQ mean? All right, number seven. What is the significance of this ratio, 500 to 0? All right, number eight. What is the significance of 5,712? And I will let you know that this is a constantly moving number. But at a certain place in time, what is the significance of this number? All right, number 9, we're almost done. What is the significance of 38 plus 2? It's not a math problem. All right, and the last one, number 10. How many Native Americans are currently in the U.S. Congress? All right, so we'll go to the next slide. Now, one of the things that, the other way I teach and I do presentations is that it's very circular. So I don't do linear things. A lot of Native people, we do a circular storytelling. And so if people don't know me, they're not used to that. I always just say, hold on, we'll get to the answers to the questions. But I am going to be dispersing things in throughout. And then also, I think I'm going to go 5 minutes over a little bit on my dog, just because we had that tech issues. So, So one of the things about Native terms, I just want to go over this. So sometimes you'll see American Indian, you'll see Native American, and you might see the word Indigenous. So remember, anything that you're learning from me tonight, I'm one person from one family, from one tribe, from one band. And so this is just my understanding and my take that I've been studying for 50 years. And so American Indian is a term that it seems like is, it might be going out of favor. It still is very valid. I use Native American just because we've always been here. And so one of the things I say, if people are writing papers or writing about it, I just suggest that you stick to one term. Now, Indigenous sometimes gets used in that, but one of the things about Indigenous is always connected to a land. So for example, Indigenous people from North America, from the US, are called Native Americans, and then there's specific tribal nations. However, there are Indigenous people in South Africa. There are Indigenous people, the Sami, in Scandinavia. And so that's one thing that we have to be careful that those really aren't interchangeable. If you hear people in Canada, they will call the Indigenous people there First Nations. And then in Alaska, Native Alaskans. A lot of times you'll hear that. So those are just some terms. All right. Okay, so let's take a look a little bit about how many tribes are there and what are the names of the tribes. And then also I like to think about what is the definition of a Minnesota Native American. All right. So in Minnesota, you hear Ojibwe. Now, if you look at the spelling in green, you'll see Ojibwe with an E, Ojibwe with an A, Ojibwe with an AY. It's like, what? That's so confusing. But all of these are referring to the same tribe, just different spellings over the years in different regions. So for example, in the 70s when I was growing up, it was very common for us to use the AY. But right now, because I live in the metro, what I'm doing is I really follow the University of Minnesota. And they have a Ojibwe People's Dictionary, and so they are really standardizing things for me. And so I use the first spelling with the E. All right. All right, and also Ojibwe. Jeff, can you click the next one? So the name actually originated from the early settlers. And so one thought is, if you look at the little arrow there, it's not that great of a picture of a moccasin, but one thought is the term referred to describing the tribe's puckered seams in their moccasins. And so therefore they named the whole group Ojibwe. All right. So again, the early settlers misunderstood the tribe's name and morphed Ojibwe into Chippewa. So it's almost like the game telephone, where names and words get misinterpreted over time. So if you say Ojibwe slowly, Ojibwe, Ojibwe, you can almost hear that it sounds like a CH, Ojibwe, and you can see how maybe it got morphed into Chippewa. All right. So Anishinaabe is the name in the Ojibwe language, and it means the original people. And so every tribal nation in their language, they have their own way of saying things. So for example, we know about the Navajo Nation, but however, in their language, they call themselves Dine, D-I-N-E. And so it's the same thing that Anishinaabe in the Ojibwe language means the original people. And so just remember, when you're hearing about tribal nations in Minnesota, Ojibwe are not necessarily equals Chippewa, but just so you understand, and then Anishinaabe. And then I always honor the tribal term used by a Native person. So for example, when I did my introduction, I specifically got from the term band of Ojibwe. Okay. Right, Jeff? And then click next one. So another tribal nation is Dakota. So Dakota is the preferred name of the tribe. And I'm just going to go a little bit into the term Sioux. So Jeff, if you click the next one. So many times people think Sioux is all right to use. However, it's important to note that the term Sioux is actually an incorrect translation of the name Dakota and Lakota tribe. And so one explanation, the one I've heard from my elders, is that the The phrase Sioux was derived from the French settlers Nadasu, and its interpretation of what the Ojibwe called their enemies, the Dakota, so it means little snakes. So if you think about it, I'm not a sports person at all, okay? But if you think about the Packers and the Vikings, would we ever allow our rival, the Packers, to name our sports team? And so that's one of the things that it's, Sioux means little snakes, and so it's very derogatory. But unfortunately, through treaties that were signed in the 1800s, incorrect naming of tribes became part of legal documents and subsequently names of reservations and tribes. So you might see things Standing Rock Sioux, all right? And again, one of the things that's really important is I always defer and I always use the word Dakota. Sometimes our Native friends and families will call themselves Sioux. But again, I always defer to Dakota first. Okay. And so think about all the different types of Minnesota Native Americans. Yes, we've got Ojibwe, we've got Dakota, we've got Winnebago, who were actually driven out during the U.S.-Dakota War. They lived just south of Mankato, and you might know them as Ho-Chunk in Wisconsin. And so there's so many other tribes in our state, people who have been transplanted, other tribal affiliations now living in Minnesota. But usually we think of Ojibwe and Dakota of our two largest tribes. All right. All right, let's look at your number one. So how many Native nations are in Minnesota? Let's see. Did you pick 11? So there are 11 if you look at the green in the northern part of Minnesota. Those are the Ojibwe. So you might know Leech Lake, you might know Fond du Lac, Boys Fort, Grand Portage, Mille Lacs, White Earth. And then if you look, there's 4 Dakota communities. I think the most well-known one for us is probably the Shakopee Mdewakanton. And we've got the Upper Lower Sioux and Prairie Island. All right. Okay, so this is kind of random, but one of the things that's really important for me as an educator, and then also if you teach big courses here, or if you're bringing books home to read about Native culture, one of the analogies I always do is I really hope to go to Greece one day. I hope. And whenever I travel to a place I'm not familiar with, I always go to the bookstore, the library, and I always read up on that. So let's say I want to learn about Greece, and I go to the bookstore, and there's only 2 books on the shelf. There's one book, and it's this massive volume, and it's from this PhD, this world-renowned scholar about the Greek language, about history, about the Greek people. But he was born and raised, let's say he's a Norwegian from, my husband's Norwegian, so let's say he's a Norwegian from Minneapolis. All right, and then the book next to it is a very small, slim volume by a Greek fisherman who has lived in the same house for generations, has fished the waters on Greece, understands the language, the culture, the innuendos. Which one am I going to pick to really understand the history, language, and culture of that people? Well, of course, I'm going to pick somebody who actually has a lived experience, and so I would pick the fisherman's book. Okay, right? And this just real quickly, for those of you interested in children's book, I know Dr. Sarah Park-Dallin, I think I saw her on here, this amazing graphic you can see going left to right. And if you move over to the right, children's book are studied at UW-Madison, and 50% of the children's book framed centered white characters. And then if you look all the way down to the left, 1% of the books featured Native Americans or First Nations authored or characters. Oh, look at Dr. Dahl. Thank you so much. And I think we have a new one too. Thank you. All right, Jeff? Okay, one of the things, not to be melodramatic, but I am going to be melodramatic. There are 2 letters for a Native person that are life and death. And it is the letter D and it is the letter S. When you are looking at books to read, books to bring home for your family, books to use, articles to use in your classroom, I want you to be very specific about looking at these 2 letters. All right, Jeff? So, lived with a D, lives with an S. Obviously, we're going to read historical books. All right. But one of the things, in fact, I was just looking at a new book that's coming out, a children's book, and they were talking about the Wampanoag tribe, and that was the the first tribe that met the quote unquote pilgrims that came. And the book said the Wampanoag people lived on the East Coast. They hunted and they fished the waters. So what does that do? That places them in the past. They are still alive. And so that is why it's really important that we have the S on there. Okay, the Wampanoag lives on the East Coast. They follow many traditions such as fishing. So you can see that, and I really want you to pay attention to the verb tense when you are looking at things to read. I'm a very big proponent of contemporary Native books, and so that's where my passion is. And so just to be aware of that, because so many of our children think that Native people are extinguished, that we're extinct, right? Okay, we can skip. Jeff, we can go to the next one. Okay, some of the things, critical literacy is a theory. This is a theory that I use in my classrooms, especially when to select. I'm really looking at anything. And a text, T-E-X-T, does not have to mean a book. It could be a hairstyle. It could be jewelry, for example, turquoise jewelry. It could be a sign on a campus. And so one of the things that we have to analyze is you need to ask these questions when you're bringing things into your home, when you're bringing things into your mind. Whose voice is represented here? Okay, so again, think about Greece. Think about Native people. If we want to learn about Native people, are we including their voice? Are we centering their voice? We also can ask whose voice is missing. Okay? What genders are missing? And then also, what is the author's intent? I think anthropologists get a bad rap because they're studying people and maybe they're not being in partnership as they're having a research project. What are the issues of power that are represented in the course or in the text or in the book? Who is being privileged in the text? And then what action do I need? Remember, we are so privileged to be under the CSJ institution, and we do need to do action, even if it's just putting that book away and finding another one. Okay, I guess we got to go a little faster, sorry. Okay, let's go to our questions. How many tribal nations in the US? What do you think? Let's see. Yes, I just had to update this. There's 574 tribal nations. And so one of the things that even as myself, it gets overwhelming to think that you're going to study all of these. So what I suggest is wherever you live, wherever you work, maybe wherever you grew up, really get to know that tribal nation and study that. All right? Okay, and then I'm going to let you on your own study more treaty rights, but just remember they are affirmed by court decisions. They're a usufractionary right. That means that even though they gave up or perhaps ceded land, woods, water, if it's in the treaty that they're allowed to fish, if they're allowed to gather on that land that was ceded in the treaties, that is still a right. Okay, all right, Jeff, next one. Okay. And then one thing that's really important to know is that these are your treaties. They're not just Native Americans treaties. This is the U.S. History, language, and culture, right? Okay, number 3, what is a Native American dwelling? All right, this is a trick question, actually. All right, that's my house. That is a Native American dwelling. So like I said, it's a trick question. So I really want you to think, and that's fine if you put maybe teepee, wigwam, but I want you to think, remember the letters S and D. So Don is here. So this is contemporary. And so remember to think about, how we always want to delineate. Are we talking about the past or are we talking about the future? So again, that's a Native American dwelling because I dwell in there. All right. I think we'll go a little faster here. What is 1 to 2%? 1 to 2%, that is the Native Americans comprise of 1 to 2% of the total US population, and only 22% of Native Americans live on reservations. In fact, Minneapolis, heart of the, not heart of the earth, but Little Earth, the United Tribes, that was one of my first jobs. That's one of the largest Native urban population and housing project in the country after LA. All right. All right, what is the significance of 1924? Native Americans were not citizens of the US until 1924. So I want you to understand my grandfather was 6 years old before he was actually considered a US citizen, even though he was born in North Dakota, never left, but he was not considered a citizen until then. All right. All right, question number 6, BQ. All right, some people are really into their genealogies. This is an example of one page of my genealogy. It goes back to the 1800s. My second page goes back to 1700. I don't do this because I enjoy genealogy. So BQ, Jeff, if you can go to the next one. BQ stands for blood quantum. So it's a federal recognition that a person must possess a certain amount of Indian or tribal blood. So it's a fractionalization of our identity. So it's usually 1/2 or 1/4. So it's a metaphor for ancestry. It's very controversial, and for Native people, it's very harming. One of the things I want you to, if anything else you learn from me, is please don't ever ask a Native people how much Indian are they, because, Jeff, want to go to the next one? So Native Americans are unique. No other group of human being is required to have a racial membership card as acknowledgement. So to put it another way, I have a tribal membership card, which I'll show you in a second. The only other people that have to show their purity, the only other things that have to show the purity are dogs and racehorses, along with Native people. So it is very harmful to fractionalize when we talk about BQ. And you can never increase your blood quantum, it only decreases. All right, Jeff? All right, this is my card. You can see on there, it's about 20 years old. You can see on there, it says degree of Indian blood. They only allow you to choose one of your tribes. So for example, I'm Cree, I'm half Cree and a mixture of Ojibwe. But the tribes won't let you choose that. You have to choose one. And so again, this is one thing that's very, very hard for Native people. It's a fractionalization of our identity. It also goes into the entire fractionalization of history, language, and culture for Native people, the fractionalization of our land, which was given up in treaties, the fractionalization of our families when our children were taken from Indian boarding schools, the fractionalization of clean water, with fracking and pipelines, although we see that there's a DAPL pipeline is frozen, we'll see. And then also even the fractionalization of our ancestors, that their bones are in boxes in museums in the basements. And so again, this is, you know, I'll get off my soapbox, but this is really harmful when we ask people how much Native are you, because we know all this history. And so, okay. That's pretty heavy one for number 6. And Jeff, you can go through that one and the next one. All right, number 7, what is the ratio? 500 to 0. Let's see. So from 1778 to 1871, the US government entered into more than 500 treaties. Now remember, it was a nation-to-nation treaties. And so they went into 500 treaties, and all of these treaties have since been violated in some way or outright broken by the US government. So that means 500 treaties, 0 were upheld the way they were signed. Right? All right, number 8. This one is a difficult one, and it's sad because this number keeps moving. I think that you are maybe aware of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. #MIW. These are sadly the murdering and missing Native women in North America. And you can see that number. And we are finally starting to get governments to actually pay attention to this and start researching it. And it was a Native woman's PhD program to start documenting all of this. You'll also see the symbol of an empty red dress as our missing sisters. Okay, all right. Okay, this one is really important. I grew up in this place. I just want to give you a trigger warning if you want to look away for a little bit. There are some scaffolds here. So the significance of 38 plus 2 is my hometown, Mankato. 38 Dakota warriors, men, hanged in Mankato on the day after Christmas, 1862. And then the plus 2 means the 2 later at Fort Snelling. And so if you look at that image, 4,000 spectators watched, and they brought their children. And why is it important to know this, especially as educators? It is important to know this. For one thing, I spent many days when I was growing up in Mankato. The Mankato Library is right over that site, and it really was hidden and swept under the rug. And it was my family who taught me about that, and many Native families taught us about that. And why is it important for us to know about that? We had our own Trail of Tears, actually, and it's still on the books, that all Dakota were forced exiles out of Minnesota. So again, why is it important for us to know this history, Jeff? Because history keeps repeating. You'll remember 2 or 3 summers ago, the Walker Art Center had a quote unquote sculpture that was supposed to be a synthesized art installation speaking against the death penalty, and one of the blueprints was from the Mankato Massacre. That Mankato Massacre is the largest mass execution ever in the United States. And so this is why it's so important to keep learning. Okay, right? All right, last one. How many Native Americans are currently in the U.S. Congress? Okay, there are 4, right? There are 2 in each party. And actually, I think this is changing as we speak. All right, so this is a record number, really exciting. They're all in the House. All right, Jeff. And then as I'm starting to wrap up here a little bit, one thing that I asked you to, if you get a book, it's by the Smithsonian Museum of the Native Americans. It's called Do All Indians Live in Teepees? And these are actual letters that questions people sent in to the Smithsonian, and Native experts really respectfully answered, and they're very short chapters, maybe 1, 2, 3 pages. And I also believe that it's really important that I honor that people who maybe know a lot of this, we honor that maybe you just want to read this on your own, in your basement where you can learn it. And because I know sometimes it's hard to recognize that we don't know things, but that's why reading this book is going to be a great summer read if you can get your hands on it. All right. Okay, Jeff, you can skip that. All right, so one of the things I just want to go back to my pedagogy that I use. I use Indigenous research methodologies to come up with this as well. But I really wanted you to take a look at the intentionality of my learning process. And Jeff, if you can go to the next one. There is something from Misero called transformative learning theory with adult learning. And one of the things that's really important is to very gently, and I respect all of you, is very gently to have a disorientating dilemma. And it really challenges student thinking. And so I'm wondering if our Wasagan quiz, our 10-question quiz, really maybe thought about underlying assumptions that maybe you did have about the Minnesota world view that you understand about Native Americans in our state. Okay. I'm not going to speak about this, but you could also certainly do some studying about Native American boarding schools and were there boarding schools in Minnesota? And then also you can maybe study a little about casinos and rights and treaty rights. So, all right, Jeff. I think you got your good timer. Go ahead, and if you want to make a statement, or if you want to ask your question out in the chat, I'm just going to wrap up maybe a challenge or a success. I know this was fast. And so Jeff, last couple ones. So one of the things that when people hear about this, they say, oh my gosh, Don, this is so depressing sometimes. And one of the things I asked my elder about that, and he said, Don, we have hope. I mean, on a side to that, Native humor across globally, Indigenous people, there's this sense of humor we have, and it's always self-deprecating. We laugh at the situation or we laugh at ourselves. And so there's that, but there's also hope. I mean, look at this. We have Peggy Flanagan, right? Our lieutenant governor. We've got Sharice Davis and Deb Hamlin, and there's going to be more in the Congress also. All right. So I just want to thank you so much, Miigwech Plamaya, for taking the first steps, including Native understandings into your own life. And the last one, which I love as a reader and writer, it's read in many different Native languages.